Officer. Is there a mic that I can use so I don't have to stand here? No, just a regular mic that I can hold. All right, so we'll just get started this way. So in 2019, experts are predicting that it's the year of the security token, right? Hello. Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. So the 2019 is the year of the security token. That's what everybody thinks. In reality, that's actually the year of the regulation. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about. And we'll start by a short video that illustrates what security token regulation actually looks like, or a token regulation actually looks like. Watch the regulator go. And there he is. All right, so what you didn't see in that video is that the duck actually came out on the other side. However, after a few minutes, the duck is probably eaten by the big tiger, which is the SEC. So I'm Yael Tamar, and I'm the partner and CMO at SolidBlock, and we are issuing security tokens through our end-to-end platform. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about our experience, because we've done an STO in the US, and never mind, we'll just keep going. Right, so first of all, to understand the regulation, I'd like to go through a little bit the underlying mechanism of the security token. So that kind of helps get into the regulator's mind. So a security token essentially is a mechanism of raising capital through a private placement, and special regulation had to be created for it to happen. So under the special regulation, the security ownership and rights are recorded via a smart contract on a distributed ledger. So security tokens represent equity, interest, debt instruments, dividend instruments, revenue shares, profit participation, or a hybrid. So the big difference between the ICO and the STO is that in the ICO, initial coin offering, which was normally represented by the utility token, we were tokenizing future profits, future revenues, some sort of a utility of a product that were expected to exist in the future. Now, what we learned from that experience and the market and the whole downturn is that type of structure did not guarantee investors any sort of privileges or rights. So a security token offering is a smart way to improve this financial instrument, and they're obviously underlying assets for the security token. So what are those assets? Those could be rights related to the asset, for example, voting rights, earnings, order, and distribution. You could have different asset, different type of shares. You can have common shares, you can have preferred shares, you can have debt instruments, as underlying assets, as well as dividend distribution. So you're basically taking the regular security rights, and then you're coding them into a smart contract. And the more of the functions that a token fulfills, then the higher is the potential value of the token itself. At the moment, the STOs that I've seen have just done very simple type of structure. Common shares, like for example the STO that we've done in the US, we just used common shares, tokenized that, no voting rights. So they're kind of going towards a more simplified structure. However, what we're going to see in the future is making the structure as similar to the security market itself. So what kind of assets can be tokenized? And the answer is every type of asset. Now the question should be, what kind of assets should be tokenized? And first and foremost, we're seeing a lot of private equity and VC funds being tokenized up to date. We're seeing real estate STOs, and that's the type of project that we've done in Aspen, Colorado. We're seeing, as I said, venture and hedge funds, and we're starting to see impact investments in the green energy and similar, as well as commodity funds being tokenized as well. So what are the advantages of tokenization, and is this really a revolutionary tool? And the answer is really no, because we've seen this before. You can do fractionalization of assets already through existing tools without blockchain. You can do liquidity to an extent. An investor can sell their shares and they can sell their ownership. And you have a certain degree of market efficiency. So what's really new with a security token, you might ask? Basically, all these tools, even though they're available to a certain extent to investors today, they're mainly available to larger institutional investors that can afford using sophisticated platforms. Now, what a security token provides is really a way for smaller investors and smaller funds to do this with a lower issuance fee structure and with much greater market efficiency. And of course, the greatest benefit of a security token is now access to global pool of investors, again, for those smaller funds, for those smaller investors that can now access global capital. So that's what we're going to see within the next few years, is investments from all over opening up to larger capital markets. Now, digital securities on the blockchain, to summarize, provide efficient fundraising process and, of course, built-in compliance, which should be good news for the regulator, because technically what is done is you taking a prospectus or a memorandum of a sort with regulatory prescriptions and you're putting that into a smart contract. So now you're assuring the regulator that these tokens can only be sold to a specific type of investor, to a specific number of investors in certain jurisdictions. So we're building that in, right? So we're providing regulatory visibility. We're also providing programmable incentives, and that's something we learned from the ICO market. We learned that, first of all, there are many investors worldwide interested in alternative investment products and that they're ready to jump in and that they're ready to bring their friends. They want to jump in early, they want to get in on a pre-sale stage, and some of them, if they really like the company, they're saying, next time you're going to raise a round, put me on top of your list. I'm right there. And that's something you can also add in the security token structure. You can have, obviously, automatic dividend distribution through a smart contract. And supposedly, in the future when there will be liquidity, these tokens are going to be easily transferable. Again, they're going to be transferable only to a certain type of investors in certain jurisdictions and so on. So there's an added layer of complexity. And again, this layer of complexity is solved by the blockchain smart contract. So what does the investor get? What does the end investor get out of this security token? Well, as we said, easier asset acquisition, and a few people before me mentioned about the new savvy millennial investor that just wants to invest with a click of a button. They get a digital ownership, they get amazing dashboards where they can see all of their security tokens. They get visibility into an underlying asset because they need to see what kinds of steps were done to ensure the valuation of the asset is accurate, to make sure the project is moving along. So even though there is no reporting standard for private issuances, I think we're going to see a lot of reporting coming out of this industry. So investors now, because there is a fractional ownership, can invest in lower amounts. So let's say those investors that were before investing 200, 300, 500K are now able to invest lower amounts. So they can much more easier diversify. There are options for liquidity. I'm very careful to promise our potential investors liquidity because, as you will see, the markets at the moment are heavily limited by the regulation. You can maximize your value and leverage all the market information that is available. There are lower fees and there is built-in compliance. So all of that is all of those are advantages to security token investors. Now, why is an STO so touted in the media as a mechanism that will succeed as opposed to an ICO? Well, first of all, we learned from our mistakes. There are different levels of investor protection. There are clear legal structure and standardized valuation and lower costs of entry. So all of those are kind of issuing or ushering STOs as this new financial product in the market. So when should a business do an STO? We're talking about slightly later stage companies with some level of turnover. And for real estate, because the costs are relatively high at the moment, we're talking about a valuation of over 10 million. And these are companies that can reach investors on a global level. So what is a tokenization process? What does it look like? So first of all, there is an evaluation of an underlying asset and a certain level of due diligence. And then there is a compliance and legal structuring in which we are creating a regulatory path. And if we're going to be raising in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia, where the money is going to be raised, where the investors are, who are the potential investors, are they accredited or are they retail? So after all of that, we're deciding on the dividend structure, on the distribution structure, and so on and so forth. All of that is coded into a smart contract. So now developers are sitting down and working on creating this if-then type of structure, right? And of course, throughout that process, we're also starting to onboard investors and getting them to go through a KYC, Know Your Customer, AML, as well as accreditation requirements, procedures. So once they pass through those procedures, they go into the whitelist. And this whitelist is accessible by A, the issuance platform when the tokens are issued and distributed, and B, it's accessible by the distribution network, which in the future is going to be exchanges, and it's going to be also over-the-counter type of platforms. They're all going to access this whitelist to enable the trade to go through. And this is a really important thing for a regulator to understand. In Israel, we're working with our local regulator and showing them this kind of a procedure in order for them to understand that the platform has a built-in compliance component. Finally, there is a token offering. We're issuing the token, we're distributing the token. There's definitely a custodian involved in the process where the tokens are being held usually by the custodian and distributed into each investor's wallet on the custodian. And finally, in the future, we're going to, or any issuer is going to be issuing these tokens on regulated exchanges. Now, there are different levels of regulation around the world, and I think that's the most difficult component of regulatory compliance right now, and it's that of the secondary market. And we're going to see why in a little bit. So far we've seen different real estate tokenization related projects, and most of them have been done in the United States. There are a few. Lyceum is a UK-US venture. Swiss Real Coin has not done their STO yet, so they're in Switzerland. Aspen Coin is the project that we've done in Colorado. There are many, many more funds, and most of these are US-based. There's a German new fund, for example. Now, these are funds that have had STOs so far. So you see there's not many. And I've been looking for examples of STOs here in the UK and in Switzerland and in Europe, and it seems like a lot of that is in the works. People are just waking up to this market here in Europe. So the security token regulation is concerning three types of challenges. Number one is issuance, which is the primary market. Number two is the trading, which is the secondary market. And finally, reporting, which right now is not a requirement, but it seems like to facilitate the secondary market, that's going to be definitely a requirement on different platforms. So what are the rules? What do the rules look like? So globally, the rules kind of converge to four main categories. Number one is who the investors are. Are they accredited investors or non-accredited investors? Obviously, regulators want to protect their investors. So in the US, you have four main gateways for STOs. The easiest one is the CF, which is the crowdfunding. You can raise from any sort of investor up to $1.07 million. And then there is this new and popular regulation called Reg A, which a lot of people think is a type of music, but in our world, that's a type of regulatory compliance. And that actually is potentially the holy grail of the STO and a way for us to approach retail investors, non-accredited investors. Now, in the non-security token world, Reg A have managed to raise hundreds of billions of dollars so far. And basically, you can raise up to $20 or $50 million from any sort of investors, accredited and non-accredited, through different tiers within the Reg A regulation. By the way, I have to preface this: I'm not a financial advisor or a legal expert, so I'm basically passionate about regulation because it's 80% of work that we do in SolidBlock. So Reg A allows you to raise money potentially from retail investors. And if you want to raise up to $50 million, and soon that's going to be $70 million, there are certain restrictions on retail investors on how much they invest, and certain reporting standards that have to be attained. Now, I have to say that for security tokens, the SEC has not issued any Reg A plus approvals so far. So I would say dozens or maybe even hundreds of companies applied, but have not received their approval. So SEC has been very, very careful about retail investment approvals. So those companies that applied for Reg A Plus and didn't get yet their approvals, they said, okay, we're gonna do Reg D for now, and later on we're gonna file a request, turn that into Reg A Plus, or maybe even an IPO. Okay, so what is Reg D? And what does it let us do? So basically, there was a recommendation called the Jobs Act, and it created exemptions for companies to not have to file their prospectus with an SEC. So what you do is you just notify the SEC that you're going to be compliant. You're basically listing your memorandum, and you don't have to create a full prospectus, which makes a much cheaper and more streamlined process for you. It will take up to 70 days or so, as opposed to regular public offering, which will take, say, 4 to 5 months. And what you can do with Reg D is raise an unlimited amount from unlimited number of investors, but you cannot market your offering to them directly unless you were in touch with them previously. So this is available to big investors that have broker-dealers, dealer partnerships, and they can basically afford this process. So you're saying, what about the little guys? So for the little guys, there was an exemption called 506C, which says, okay, you can go and fundraise, you can market the security to anyone you want, but you can only raise up to $10 million. So those are the exemptions of Regulation D. And finally, there is Regulation S, which just says avoid the US. Don't change your attire to an orange suit. Just go with non-US investors. You'll be fine. So the complexity added to all of this is the secondary market, and that's something that Regulation D is not going to help you with, because FINRA is requiring anybody, any security that wants to be traded on exchanges, to have additional reporting standards, to have additional type of rules that they have to adhere to. So that's something you really need to be careful of. So in the US, to be able to trade security tokens, you need to be both a broker-dealer and have an ATS license, Alternative Trading System license. So that's something that very, very few exchanges have at the moment, or you can be a full-blown exchange, and that's a much more complicated license as well. So that's the US regulation. Now the European regulation is similar in a way, but it's slightly more lax, because you can technically have different exemptions, the qualified investor exemption in private placement, and then you have no limitations whatsoever. You can raise from any accredited investor and any amount that you want. There are other exemptions like limited amount, where investors can, where a token which is worth at least 100,000 euros and in no less than 100,000 euros can raise, again, from any kind of investor in the EU. There's a limited network which says you can raise for up to 150 investors in any jurisdiction. So let's say 150 in the UK, 150 in France, 150 in the Netherlands, and then again you can raise any amount from any investor, right? So and there are other exemptions that you guys can look up and feel free to approach me and I can help to the best of my ability, but probably best to get a securities lawyer specializing in this market. So the EU seems to have a better and more clearer path for security tokens, and that's why there's a certain degree of confidence that people will come to the EU market to do security tokens before they even go to the US. Although in practice, we've seen otherwise. I'm not going to go through the Asian market. I'm just going to go straight into the trading regulation, which I already said you need to have either exchange license or be a broker-dealer. Only accredited investors are allowed to trade, which is a huge limitation at the moment, because there are some regulations that allow retail investors to participate in the issuance, but then they won't be able to trade their tokens. And there are additional levels of risk exposure here that exchanges have to take into consideration, which is every single investor has to go through KYC AML, accreditation check, but then every token has their own regulation, meaning that every token has a set of parameters for allowing to trade. So every exchange has to go through that set of parameters before they can trade this token from one person to the other. So what we do at SolidBlock is we provide that sort of pipeline or platform clarity for the exchanges that we're going to be working with. And then there's even a worse thing out there. It's called Rule 144, and that's just a whole list of prescriptions of how securities can be sold to whom and so on and so forth on the secondary market. I invite you guys to open up a long list and check it out. So obviously there's going to be a huge industry of legal professionals and otherwise working on the secondary market. So these have listed themselves on the security token exchange list, and it's very interesting that they are claiming that they have the capability to trade, because none of them really are trading security tokens at the moment. Part of the reason why is because in the US, under Reg D, exemptions 506C and B, you have to lock down your security tokens for 12 months for US investors. So I showed you in the previous slide, there was only one security token that I've seen that has been traded, and it's really the Spice VC. It's an Israeli VC firm registered in Singapore, and it basically filed under two regulations, Reg S, which is outside of the US, and Reg D. And the investors that got the Reg D cannot trade their tokens, while the investors that got the Reg S can currently trade their tokens. And those tokens I've seen trading in the market. Our project in Aspen Coin is currently under a lockdown until mid-2019. And reporting regulation is a huge challenge, because on the one hand, you don't have to do any reporting, right? But on the other hand, you have to satisfy your investors' requirements. And as we see it, there's a big challenge of insider trading. So on SolidBlock, we are creating automatic reporting that will create as much transparency as possible. So we're basically enabling investors to trade asset ownership on a data-driven metrics platform. We're helping with issuance, moving into the secondary market, and we're currently focused on real estate assets. This is the asset that we've done, raised $18 million on an Indiegogo platform as a client-facing, investor-facing platform, which represented 19% of equity in the asset, issued 18 million tokens. So basically, this was a very high-end brand that went for this security token offering. It was the first ever commercial real estate security token offering. You guys are going to get the presentation, so you'll see the complexities of the STO process. And by the way, I've never shared this slide with anyone before, and you guys will have the first dibs, but basically explains the overall STO process. You can also see the investor onboarding process, how that's done. And I think this is the kind of clarity that the regulators will greatly benefit from. And yeah, I'd love to get any questions that you guys may have. How much time do we have? So you can eat faster.
7 or 8 minutes.
All right, cool. All right, thank you so much.
Sorry, yeah. So, questions?
I speak very fast American English, but I thought they spoke that in the UK. At least understood.
Thank you, Yael.
Thank you. Thank you, Obi.
What is the status of the Aspen project? How is it performed?
Right, so you can see the coin on Etherscan. So because the coin was issued on a modified ERC20 token. So you can see it on Ethereum. You can see all the holders of the token. It has not been traded because there's a lockdown for 12 months. So we'll be able to see what happens within the next few months when the token comes out of the lockdown. Now, the interesting implication of that is that, investors are going to want to see liquidity. They're going to want to see a level of trade. So there's obviously another market of market making for the security and providing liquidity, providing distribution. So right now, the project owners are working on creating the distribution and liquidity providers. Yeah. Thank you.
Just Ron,
sorry. Hi. As an ERC20 token, it can go to any Ethereum address, correct?
Sorry?
It can go to any Ethereum.
It's a modified ERC20 token,
Okay.
which means that it will go to any Ethereum address that adheres to a number of criteria, which is only accredited investor, which does not exceed the total pool of 2,000 investors. So let's say if there's currently 2,000 investor pool, and if you want to sell to 2001, you cannot sell half of your ownership. You have to sell the whole thing. So that's an added complexity that we're solving on a technological level. So,
and are you using an oracle for that? Well, I guess my question is, what happens if you go bust?
If you go bust.
If you as a platform intermediary go bust.
Oh yeah. Okay. So it is on an Ethereum. It is listed on a using Ethereum network. So we're not holding any token. We're not holding any funds. So there is a custodian that is facilitating that service. So I guess the question would be, how safe is the custodian that we're using? So we're just a technological platform. So we just created an infrastructure which is based on a public blockchain. So the question is here, what are the rules and the securities related to the custodian? And that's a really good question, and I'll be happy to get your contact and get the answer for you.
Hi, maybe not quite such a great question. I'm Stuart Calvin from the Gibraltar Stock Exchange.
Thank you.
Just blue sky for me, say a decade out.
Yeah.
Everyone obviously is talking about real estate as such an untapped, illiquid market. How do you see fractional ownership in real estate in 10 years if it all goes well?
Thank you, Stuart. So the holy grail would be to see retail investors to jump in to the game, because what I like to see personally is democratization of this market, to have people securely invest in real estate, people who right now don't have access to this market, to this illiquid market. So I see a level of even single apartments, or even taking ownership of community projects, let's say building playgrounds or building stadiums, or have even on a municipality level for us to be able to invest in certain services that have real estate assets. So that's a holy grail. That's how the utopian vision that we have. more likely what's going to happen is that, accredited investors or professional investors are going to get better visibility, better access. More projects are going to be financed. Smaller projects are going to be financed. Market is going to become more diversified and more accessible to everyone. So it's going to be in between those two, in my opinion. Thank you.
Question was good, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, go ahead, guys. Yes, please.
I guess this is more of a comment than a question, but on your point about the retail investors, I kind of see it going the same way as it always ends up with retail investors, like with crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending, for example. Retail investors initially get quite excited about the ability to access investment directly, but ultimately they don't want to manage their own risk portfolio, and then you get intermediaries coming in the middle who offer to manage that or to introduce some sort of fund structure, and it all goes the same way as the traditional markets.
Well, that's a great comment, and I'll tell you why. It was mind-boggling for me to see the statistics in the U.S. Who here can guess what is the percentage of people who trade stocks in the U.S.? Anybody wants to venture a guess? 80%. 80%? Anyone else? Slightly lower?
About 60, I guess.
60%? So it's 50%. So 50% of Americans trade. And that wasn't always like that, right? 10 years ago, what happened about 10 years ago, which shot the stock trading through the roof? There was platforms like E-Trade, there was platforms like Robinhood, where instead of sitting, and doing your boring job in front of the computer, you have a second screen nearby with your stock trading portfolio, and you're just kind of, cursing quietly on the side when things go down or celebrating things go up. So what we're going to see is E-Trade type of platforms for security token, and then people are going to get in on the game, analytics, a new industry, and of course they're going to be brokers. Because it's not for everyone, but 50% of the people could potentially jump on the game.
Hi, this is Saad from Cryptoassets. Would there be any preference for the location of the asset that you can tokenize? Is this something that could be any part of the world, or?
Yes, it definitely could be any part of the world. In fact, we have different assets in the portfolio, and one of them is in Somaliland, Africa, for example. And the big question here is where the investors come from. So we can have an underlying asset anywhere, as long as they're valuation procedures and taxation and those types of procedures are dealing with the jurisdiction of the asset. However, anything related to investment is dealing with the jurisdiction of an investor. So that's why it's particularly important to apply to any relevant regulation in the investor's jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's eat. All right, thanks guys.